Ready when you are.
I am ready. The ready. So you're gonna introduce us one, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna come in good. We don't even have an introduction before.
We don't really
I
have an
started
introduction.
This thing, what I like to do with Jimmy Dore is when he starts to talk, I just like interrupt him.
Yeah, you've done that to me before.
It's so funny.
It's funny to you.
Okay.
No, it's funny to me too.
It's funny to everybody except for the one
nuance.
that see, I just thought. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. So somebody accused us on Twitter of naturalizing racism.
What is naturalizing racism?
That's a good question. And I suspect this person probably didn't completely have a mastery or grasp of the various terms he was using. I think, though, what he was accusing us of was suggesting that racism is part of the natural order, and so that you can't necessarily hope to get rid of it. You know, you have to sort of work and create policy with the understanding that people are going to be racist.
So who's naturalizing? Like we're the ones
So
saying...
we're the ones saying, therefore, the consequence of that is that we've naturalized racism, which is to say that it's part of the natural order, and so like you can't do anything about it. I don't
know if I object to the fact that it's part of the natural order, but I object to the fact that you can do something about it.
And so this is the first problem. Is I don't think either of us holds a sort of theological anthropology that allows us to put human actions and phenomena outside of the realm of nature.
Yeah.
And so
I'm a constructivist.
Exactly. So if humans are part of the natural world and humans are racist, then racism is a natural phenomenon, right? One should not, without a theological worldview that turns nature into necessary, right? Just because it's a natural phenomenon doesn't mean it's a necessary phenomenon. It's just one that happens to occur in the natural world among the animal known as humans.
Yeah, and it's arisen.
Exactly.
So, like we've
it's
seen
happened.
it.
So you can't say it's not natural. And so, but I think what this person is also conflating are the notions of race and racism. If I were to say race is natural, then we might say, oh, okay, what do you mean by that? Like it has a biological reality? No, we'd have to say, no, race is not natural in that sense. You might speak of it as natural to the extent of the idea that human beings are social animals that use language, and race is a social construct that is adjudicated on the basis of language. And in that sense, race is natural, but it's not natural in terms of a natural phenomenon that we discover in nature. It's one we construct socially through dialogue.
I can't disagree with what that concept is. I mean, it seems to be something we face a lot, that there are philosophies in thinking, and for you to be consistent, you must continually be aligned to those ideas of thinking. So it seems like we will recognize a constructionist worldview, which means that our world is full of social constructs. We have created this paradigm which we live in, so we must think of reality as this paradigm which we've created, and that's just that.
No, and that's exactly what it is. But I worry about the way people, and what was funny is that at one point this person starts saying like, human beings think, act, and speak, so shouldn't we intervene in those things? And I wanted to be like, wait a minute, you just said racism isn't natural, but you just described it as natural to human behaviors and actions. So like, which one is it? Is it natural, so we can't do anything about it? Is it unnatural, and so we have to intervene? And I worry about the way that we tend to use terms like this without really realizing it, right? Because at some point, the argument he's making is based on a theological worldview that I'm not sure he even possesses. The idea that humans are sort of outside of nature. And so like something like race or racism isn't a function of nature. And even the more problematic to me underlying value, which is that if it happens in the natural world, therefore there's some sort of like normative guidance that we're supposed to draw from that, right? Which is sort of like the classical argument that, say, the Christian churches have made, which is that we are the ones who understand the way nature is supposed to be because God told us how God created nature. And so just because something occurs in the natural world doesn't mean that it has to occur that way. It just happens to have occurred that way. And as people, we can intervene, we can act differently. And so we have to move away from this idea that if we talk about something as natural, we're talking about it as necessary.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. So you just jumped on it before I could even get in, that seems to be the confusion of whether it's natural or it's necessary. And we seem to really take that word natural and to make it to be all these weird things. Like we say, that chemical isn't natural. I'd hate to tell you this. It's completely natural.
Yeah, if you made it out of elements that exist, it's kind of part of the natural world.
If we have it.
Yeah, there's nothing that happens that is outside of nature unless you adopt a theological worldview in which man or human beings are a creation of God, and through our divine rationality, we are separate from the natural order. And it's only on that basis then that, you can talk about things that are clearly all part of the same phenomena as being one part natural, one part unnatural, or one part beyond nature.
Yeah. Nature is the things which occur here, and then everything else is the things that we make up. So if it's tangible, it's natural, no matter what we're going to. So
if it happens.
So race, though, can't be natural because it just doesn't happen without our construction.
Yeah, so racism is natural. Race is not. Right? Racism
is a natural result of the social
come
construction.
Together and construct stuff in nature. Race is just something we made up.
Right, totally. So it's natural for us to grit into those group mentalities that make us that we're talking to mostly progressives and not talking to the white guy in West Virginia that I'm trying to desperately tell you that you're in the same damn boat and right? I'm trying to talk to you.
And the reason some of us won't talk to that person is because he believes in race. And racism isn't natural. We have to make him agree with us before we can dialogue with him. And that just can't be the premise of dialogue. And it also, and this is kind of something that we touched on in the Crutcher commentary episode, the 60 Minutes episode that we talked about, which is that policy can't codify you as the center of experience. So the fact that you're offended by something doesn't fucking matter. The fact that you're victimized by something doesn't fucking matter. The fact that you're traumatized by something, that you will bear this on your person for the rest of your life, doesn't fucking matter. That by itself cannot be the premise from which policy proceeds. And so something like the fact that there is irrational hatred in the world is not something that you can demand policy do away with, overcome. What you have to demand is that policy be realistic about what it can accomplish and what it cannot accomplish. And the idea that we can sort of craft a policy that eliminates something like racism or misogyny or anything else, it's not happening. Because even if we eliminate those things, we haven't eliminated oppression and we haven't eliminated hatred. We've simply eliminated particular forms of it. And until we sort of intervene at a probably much deeper level, sort of like level of how we fundamentally structure our language, so as we can be aware of all like the various problematics that I think we spent a lot of time sort of pointing out, like, no, that's not what that person just said. It's actually this. We're always going to be stuck with these isms and just trying to like put out little fires instead of addressing the overall problem.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. Being a constructivist means that I'm focused entirely on the methodology. So the philosophy I try to get to my team all the time is it's not whether we have the best outcome, it's whether we took the best path. And that's hard to conceptualize because we're so focused on controlling our outcomes that we can't realize that we have to control the way we walk.
Would you say it's the best path or the best path based on the knowledge we have of the situation?
Yes, the best
right
information
now?
You have at the time. So even though you're still only looking for the right path, because if you look for the right outcome, you can get there through methodologies which won't enable you to accurately predict the future in the next instance. So good science can accurately predict the future. That's the entire point. And when you're saying about, you were saying a second ago, I think that when we call the police department or we subscribe to the system, we've given up our individualism and our plea for individualism, because even from a basic philosophical manner, if I have an individualistic problem with you, then we take that on one-on-one. So the ultimate way that I can say you raped my sister, the ultimate way for me to control that situation to make sure you never do it again is to take the individual method of killing you one-on-one. And then so my my individualistic goals then took the priority. But the moment you give into the system, you are subscribing to the social construct of our criminal justice system and what equality looks like there, which means the bigger picture for our society, not for you as an individual. In all reality, if you want to worry about you as an individual, then ignore our system and do what you want to do.
Yeah, and I think it also ignores. My biggest concern is that when you look at sort of like human history, and especially you look at the history of oppressed peoples, it's rare that when those peoples then come to power, as they understand it, or if they, achieve their liberation through some sort of a revolutionary act, that what results is a new or reformed society that no longer has oppression, right? What tends to happen is the new society looks a lot like the old society. It's just different people in different roles, right? And so I worry when, for example, an activist might be really concerned about racism, or really concerned about homophobia, or really concerned about misogyny, but they're not actually capable of talking about the way oppression occurs more broadly, and they can only sort of intervene in the single phenomenon, and so, because inevitably what happens is, even if you do away with this particular form of oppression, you still haven't actually intervened in the problematic, or in the problem of asymmetrical power. And at some point, this really is an issue of power. And, I don't think of power as top down in the sort of like Marxist way, where like the people at the top who control the means of production tell everybody else what to do. I think of power in the more Foucauldian way, where it's diffuse, and there are various ways in which power plays out. And there are the power relationships in the home, which are different than in the school, which are different than in the society. But we all participate in power in some way, but we also participate in making ourselves subjects to power in some way. And we have to sort of intervene in this if we want to talk about how we do away with oppression. Because if we focus on any single form of oppression, right? Once upon a time, the discourse that preceded, that was antecedent to the discourse of race, was the discourse of, was a religious discourse, was the discourse of Christians versus non-Christians, and Christians as the new race, the humanity. And so once upon a time, we managed to do away with some forms of, at least, of anti-Christian sentiment, and for a long time, what the Christian world dealt with them was like Christians versus Christians, which was still its own form of anti-Christian sentiment, but in a slightly different manifestation. But it's clear that Christianity's experience of oppression, whether under Rome or in other periods, was not one that taught them a lesson that you don't use power in this way. I mean, they essentially took power in the way that it was used against them and then used it against other people. And I worry that when we talk about the fight for liberation, we're really often only talking about our liberation, which is to say we're talking about a fight for power, not for a fight for the end of oppression.
Yeah, I'm really struggling with this as a concept as a whole, because when I say things like white supremacy or colonialism and fighting white power, then people will be like, well, then, there's black power, and it's not, how's it right for somebody to say black power in our society? And then I'm trying to say, like, well, because this is a power system of white supremacy as the oppressor, and so everyone that's oppressed can have that position from a logical standpoint because they're the ones that are being oppressed. And at some point in time, go back to the Ottoman Empire, that was brown power. So it's more the dynamic between the oppressor and the oppressed than it is to think of who has the power. It's that nobody can have that power, because that's what we'll do. We had black power, we had brown power, and now we're in a period of white power. It just happens to be that we're in a period of white supremacy at this moment, but brown supremacy and black supremacy have existed.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's important to think about how do we intervene in power, not how do we intervene in this particular relationship of power. Because at that point, and look, history has taught us, right? When the oppressed rise, it's usually not to do away with oppression, right? It's usually to then take power and impose that on other people.
That revenge has got to feel good. I mean, who was that? Nate Turner? Like, I mean, right? Like, that would have to feel good.
It would certainly have to feel good. And it's not, we look at we're not exactly sympathetic, right? Like when the barbarians come over the walls in Rome, we're not like, damn, Rome, man, I can't believe that happened to you. We're like, yeah, fuck you, Rome. Should have helped them out.
Right.
But at the same time, we have to, and this is again, like, this is where it becomes dangerous to sort of centralize our own experiences and narratives sometime, because we can also centralize our own victimization. And here's the truth of human history. Most human beings who have lived on Earth have been subject to an arbitrary and oppressive power, right? The fact that some human beings haven't been does not make you entitled to live that same existence. The simple truth is, it is more common as a human being to be oppressed than to not be oppressed.
I would have to argue it's impossible. I mean, like, think about anybody that you think has everything. They still have those same burdens, and
there are still issues. And so again, I mean, and power being relative, they may not be oppressed in the same way you are. And there might be communities that are oppressed in a unique and specific way in a particular context. But we have to be careful that what we're fighting for isn't for more power, but actually for the dissolution of, if not the dissolution of power, at least the dissolution of asymmetrical power relationships. And there might always be some challenges in that. But, I do think ultimately it is the dissolution of power that has to be the goal.
Is that what freaks out, like, white America about people like us? Because we're the inside. We can move through white communities and be entirely accepted, but yet have this worldview that says that we have too much power and need to give it up.
I mean, I do think that is threatening. I mean, I don't know. That whole question is so weird for me, right? Because for me, it kind of depends what white community we're in. Because there are white communities in which I would never be accepted because I'm Puerto Rican. And then there's like, that was my experience in Massachusetts growing up. And then here I'm just a white guy. It's such a weird sort of. But you are right that, like, that is what makes us threatening. But I also hope people understand that, like take me as a Latino. Like, if I'm concerned about the oppression of Latinos in the United States, or the oppression of Puerto Ricans in the northeastern United States, or wherever you find them in large numbers. If my fight is only for that, I'm not really fighting oppression. I'm fighting for me, which is different. What I'm demanding is power, not the end of oppression. And I think we have to, especially those of us who have sort of activist sentiments or tendencies, we have to be able to acknowledge the difference, that just because we feel oppressed in some way doesn't mean that experience has to be like the sort of centralized perspective that determines the narratives for how everybody else understands power, or how to intervene in power. Like, no experience of oppression bears, carries with it that special authority, some sort of hermeneutic privilege to determine how we move forward from here on out. And the simple truth is, oppression is too widespread a human phenomenon for us to make of it that.
Yeah, I mean, and how do we get, like, we keep seeing that in the activism community, which is why you're pointing it out in there, is that we'll see somebody fighting for the black male not getting shot by police, but then subscribes to a transgendered black female from being able to go into the bathroom that she wants. Yeah. And it's like, but you're not getting the system.
And, I do think that persons who are from oppressed communities, and I think the tendency or the, what has become sort of the common sense among the left is, like, you can't tell an oppressed person how to respond to their oppression. You can't judge them for how they respond. Because it's like, no, I think you can. Because the history of oppressed peoples when they come to power is that they generally oppress other people. So if we say you can't judge someone who's fighting their oppression, but doing it in a way that seems to reinscribe a problematic power relationship, then we're ignoring the fact that these liberation movements rarely end in liberation. They might end in liberation for a specific group of people, but they rarely end in liberation, broadly speaking. And I don't think we can ignore that fact of history just because we feel sympathetic towards a particular group or experience.
My objection is going to be that these things are intersectional with other forms of oppression, and it almost is guaranteed to come with a form of educational oppression.
Sure, yeah.
So when I have certainly said that I'm not interested in judging how the oppressed respond to their oppression, because of the intersection of education. So if you don't know better because you're oppressed, how can I, especially from an educated position, make a judgment about your ignorance, which is in the design of your oppression.
But you have to make a judgment if what you're doing is being asked to sign on to their program.
True.
Right?
Totally. So so you're right. So I do this all the time where even when we want to do police reforms, we're going to go too long. It happens every time. But even when we do police reforms and we want to talk about like which candidates for mayor would I be willing to subscribe to and sign up for all these other cities? And we've had guys that were like pretty much there, but they were anti-gay. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Like I can't
rock with you.
I can't. Right. And I know like the policing thing is important, but I just can't have my system attached to this, you know? And so where do we go from there?
Yeah, no. And look, I mean, I think nobody is saying, you know, you can't fight against the fact that you're oppressed. But what I'm suggesting is that history has taught us that if that fight doesn't sort of include this intersectional perspective, the fact that there are many forms of oppression, the fact that power is diffuse, that there are ways in which I might be oppressed, but there might also be ways in which I have an awful lot of power.
Sure,
if you're not prepared to,
poor.
But exactly, you know, if you're not prepared to intervene in all of those dynamics, so to intervene in the problem of power in general, then you've lost me. Because I'm not interested in giving you power. I'm interested in intervening in the problem of power.
Totally accurate way of saying it that comports to the policing thing. It's not that, but when people want to ask me, it's like, look, I am not the authority on policing. I am the authority on the methodology to proper policing. So I'm telling you how to get there. Your lack of courage to get there isn't on me. You know, like we have to all pick up those mantles.